Welcome to our Iowa Ideas Arts and Culture track session. And today we're going to talk about long-term sustainability and funding streams. So that is always top of mind when you are an arts presenter anywhere, but especially coming out of the pandemic. I am Diana Nolan, the arts and entertainment reporter at the Gazette based in Cedar Rapids, but I have been in Des Moines many times to report and review shows, as well as all around Eastern Iowa. So it's a pleasure to have so many of you here this morning. Our panelists today are Jeff Chelsvig, Tiffany Spinner, Laura Mannett, and David Schmitz. And I will give each of them just a moment to let you know who they are. Jeff, let's start with you.
Thank you, Diana. My name is Jeff Chelsvig. I'm president and CEO of Des Moines Performing Arts. We own and operate the Des Moines Civic Center and Coles Commons and Stoner Theater here in Des Moines. And we operate the Temple Theater, which is a 276-seat theater in a restored Masonic temple downtown. And happy to be here.
Excellent. Tiffany?
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Tiffany Nagel-Spinner. I am the Director of Development with the Des Moines Arts Center. I also have actually had the very wonderful privilege of getting to work with Jeff at Des Moines Performing Arts as well. I've been in fundraising for the arts and culture sector for about 10 years. The Arts Center is the museum located in Des Moines, but we also oversee the Papa John Sculpture Park in the heart of downtown as well. So thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you. David?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is David Schmitz, administrator with the Iowa Arts Council. We're a division of the Iowa Department of Cultural Affairs and a federal partner with the National Endowment for the Arts. Good to be with you.
Thank you. And Laura stepped away for just a moment, but she is affiliated with the Brooklyn, Iowa Opera House. And this is a gem in their community that was slated for the wrecking ball until everybody said, oh, no, wait a minute. We're going to renovate and bring it back to life. And I've been there and it is beautiful. So she will be joining us in just a moment. Okay, so we'll just start the discussion by noting over the past 2 decades, I've noticed how corporate support has been swinging between allocated sponsorships for the arts versus social services. The pendulum seems to swing back and forth about which is going to get the dollars. So what's the status of that kind of support today? What are you folks seeing? David?
I'm happy to start us off with a thought. Really interested what my colleagues feel on this one. I would say from our standpoint, Diana, when you shared that question with us in advance, the first thing I did was to look at the Giving USA report. And for those who aren't familiar, each year there's a report put out about philanthropy in this country and what the trends are. And what's interesting, I think, when we talk about corporate is that it is actually increasing, but as you noted in your intro there, how the corporate pie is being divided has changed substantially, especially during the pandemic. And so as you noted, social services, human services, there's a lot of increased needs there. And so there's a lot of increased funding for those areas. But I think you have to look at it in the context of the complete funding picture. Support for the arts in this country remains primarily funded through individuals. And individuals overall are 70% of all giving. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind. There are shifts within the corporate sector, and Jeff and Tiffany and others who meet with those partners can share that in more detail. But I think overall, giving is actually increasing in corporate, and our sector is really adjusting, I think, to a lot of shifts in the priorities.
Thank you. Jeff, what are you seeing there at the Civic Center?
Well, it's interesting. I think David is exactly right. I mean, there is it is a shifting landscape, and I go back to, I've been here in my position for 27 years, so I've had a lot of years to study this. And when I came to town 27 years ago, there were 3 or 4 major corporations that had corporate giving departments, and they had directors and vice presidents who met with us very regularly. And with one exception, those are all gone now. And so, especially with mergers and acquisitions with larger corporations, we used to deal with people that we dealt with for years. Now we're dealing with somebody in Indiana or in North Carolina who knows very little about us. But what I think we've seen as a trend also has been with corporations starting to look at supporting more of the activities that might be in their own sector. So for instance, with financial institutions, of which there are a number here in Iowa, they may be looking at ways to find folks to help them to become more sustainable and learn how to save and learn how to invest and do things like that. And that goes into a different type of a thing. What we've seen over the years, and I'm sure Tiffany and David can talk about this, is that corporations for a long time used to look at the way that at our organizations as being a way to attract and to retain employees. And it still is a very important thing to them. I would also just say real quickly that the corporations still do, in my mind, and Tiffany can talk to this as well, step up for the capital campaigns. They are traditionally very, very supportive of those, and bricks and mortar. Almost everything that's happened in Des Moines over the past maybe 60 years has been mostly from the corporate donations.
Excellent. Tiffany, how about you?
I absolutely would echo what Jeff was saying, as well as David. I think that we have seen this pivot, this swing. I started my fundraising career almost 20 years ago on the social service side of things. So it was much like Jeff said, we used to be able to have these regular sit downs. We were talking with people. We knew them. We saw them at dinner. We were able to establish relationships in our local communities with people who were in their roles for a really long time. Now coming out of the pandemic, almost all of the people that were at the heads of major corporations and even those locally have all changed. And in many cases, they've changed multiple times over the last 5 years. And so having that relationship is a little bit more challenging now, certainly than it was before, because you could be consistently sharing your message in front of people and having those discussions. Whereas now it's balancing, as Jeff mentioned, from the art side of things, why what we do is important from an economic standpoint and vitality of the community, and why people want to live here, work here, why they want to be purchasing tickets to go see a performance in their community without having to drive far away, why they want to come to a museum and see internationally recognized artists that are relevant to the work of our time. And so I think we have to strike that balance. But I think what's also interesting, and I think that all of us here are doing, is it's not just the recruitment side of things anymore, right? It's the programming that we're doing to reach new audiences. Having just participated in one of the sessions right before this about maintaining diversity and equity and inclusion in our programming, both from what we're presenting and how we're presenting it to how we are reaching new audiences within our own communities, whether that be in the urban, city centers, and reaching out to our partners and community members from rural communities as well. So we are consistently doing that and then sharing that message back to our corporate sponsors to let them know that those are things that we're doing, that some of our programming may not have a direct tie to how are they creating individual financial sustainability, but teaching them tools through the arts that will ultimately help them down the road.
Excellent, thank you. And now, Laura, from the perspective of a smaller community that is rescuing a gem and bringing it back to life, what kind of funding streams have you tapped into, and what ones are sustaining you at the moment?
So, to echo kind of what they were saying, it used to be all about corporate sponsorships. And I think one thing that we look at here in a rural community is we don't have large corporations. So we really are working with and incorporating into the conversation all of our thought leaders in the community, everybody that wants to see this be successful, but maybe isn't sure how to operate it day to day, but they have great ideas on programming, and really getting their input. We've done a lot of talking and visioning sessions, and you did a great job introducing me. I don't know what happened with the video there a little bit ago, but we just started in 2020. We just opened our doors in June of 2020. So this is really kind of our first normal year. and just really listening to the leaders in the community on what they would like to see, both from a programming side and then getting their input financially as well.
Excellent. So I don't know that the derecho touched your markets the way it did here in Cedar Rapids. Did you have any fallout from did the derecho hit you guys in Des Moines and Brooklyn? Did you experience any of that?
We did, but it was while we were under construction here.
Okay, so it didn't impact the structure at all. And
Right.
for you other folks, I think it kind of skirted you, didn't it, in Des Moines?
Yeah, absolutely.
For the most
Certainly not
part.
the kind of, not the damage you had.
Okay,
Cedar
so I
Rapids.
know that that's added another layer of challenge, especially in Cedar Rapids, Marion area, as far as when so many funds had to be diverted to derecho recovery, that, that has thrown another monkey wrench into the works, or another hurdle. How did you folks all deal with the pandemic? I mean, all of a sudden, so many spots in Cedar Rapids area, the shows had just opened and all of a sudden they're closed. And there goes the finances. There's no money coming in. There's still money going out. You have staffs to deal with. How did you guys all deal with and weather the pandemic?
I'll speak just because we didn't have near the challenges that I know our colleagues did, but I will say we had the advantage of we're a free museum. So we weren't reliant on ticketed revenue to be able to have people come in. We're also, by nature of being a museum, people typically distance themselves in general when they're looking at art. So we were really only closed for about a 4-month period of time, and we were able to pivot very quickly during that time frame. From an operational standpoint, but we did most definitely, because the uncertainty, 11% of our fundraising revenue comes from here in Des Moines, Bravo Greater Des Moines, and which is is reliant on the hotel motel tax. And so that stopped. And so we immediately pulled back everything from expenses and projected, what this could look like 6 months. I remember sitting in April of 2020 doing our 6-month projection, our 12-month projection, and 18-month projection, never thinking, my God, this is going to go on as long as it did. So, again, but I can just say, from our perspective, and also speaking to your earlier question about corporate support, we knew at that point, while we didn't have the derecho situation, we did know that everything was going to food insecurity and to far greater focus on social services and those partners that needed that. But we also had to continually maintain a message to show that when life comes back to whatever our new normal was going to look like, that the arts are still vitally important, and we would need to have continued investment in them for us to maintain the level that we were at pre-pandemic.
Thank you. Jeff, how did you guys weather the storm, so to speak? I guess that's not the best choice of words when we had a derecho.
Right. Well, we're about a $20 million a year operation, and about 80% of that money comes from earned revenues, so ticket revenue and concessions and things of that nature. So when the theaters were shut down, we were completely in a place where we had to look at what our resources were. Thankfully, we had some financial resources that we could draw upon, but we also, to Tiffany's point, we didn't know how long this was going to last. We also knew that when we reopened, we had to be reopening at full capacity. Our large hall is 2,700 seats, and we could not do anything financially. It made no sense to try and reopen with distance social distancing. So the first thing that we did was we looked at our expenses. We did cut some staff, which was very hard. And our full-time staff at the time was about 40 people. We did cut about a quarter of those people, and then the rest took major pay cuts from 10 to 50%. We did a quick appeal to some of our major individual donors and raised about $1 million from that. And then we were very fortunate to be one of the recipients of the Shuttered Venue Operator Grants from the SBA, which, as David knows, most of the federal funding that we get here at our organization comes from the National Endowment for the Arts. We do get some money from the Department of Cultural Affairs, but this is really the most significant amount of money that we've ever really seen from a government entity. And it was it was a large gift, but it was also, or a large grant, I should say, but it was also not quite as much as we would have earned in the same period of time had we been operating. But it gave us the stability to rehire, move people back to their regular salary, and it was just it was a scary time for a long time. But once we reopened about a little over a year ago, we've been operating at full capacity in our theaters, and it's been going well, and so hopefully we are starting to emerge from this, and we're just grateful for the support that we got. I would say that our donation stayed very significant during that time, and as I said, we actually raised more money in 2021 than we did the previous year from individuals. And that extra $1 million that we got from 13 donors made a huge difference.
Yes, and those shuttered venue grants really seem to offer a lifeline to a lot of organizations, large and small, because we even had some of our mom and pop kind of arts presenters in Cedar Rapids and Marion that benefited from that, as well as Iowa City. So I think there was just a lot of gratitude for the recognition on the national level that they needed to step in and help, because I'll let you guys speak. I could talk forever about the importance of the arts in times of trial, but David, what have you noticed along these lines?
Yeah, well, I'll speak briefly to some of the numbers and the programs that I think help to tell that story. But first, I want to just put it in very human terms. I remember so clearly in late March of 2020, when everything started, and a bluegrass musician from Decorah, Iowa, Lori King, who has traveled and toured the state for more than 4 decades. I remember her telling us, I have played through every tough time before, every recession, every downturn, but I've never experienced a time like this. And she told us that in the context of us starting some of our relief and recovery grants. And that's about what we did the last 2 years. And so to just transition to those programs a little bit, as Jeff and Tiffany noted, they were really, really critical for a lot of groups, not in replacing everything that was lost, and as Jeff noted, replacing what could have been earned, but just providing stability and allowing people to return to work, allowing operations to reopen and resume, and to get some sense of normalcy back. And so we were really proud to be able to be part of that. A couple of numbers that I think help to tell the story. I know just between the spring of 2020 and December, Iowa's largest arts and cultural organizations had realized losses of 50 million, and that quickly grew into the many hundreds of millions throughout 2021. And those are realized losses. Those are, as my colleagues have shared, shows that didn't happen, bookings that were made and couldn't be completed, exhibits that were contracted and could not be put on view. The unrealized losses are much greater. So it was an enormous shock, I think, nationally to our industry, and that's true here in Iowa. I'll just add, for the performing arts sector, it was magnitudes worse. And so for Jeff, and especially a lot of our live music venues, as well as our individual artists, I will add, they were really impacted at an order of magnitude that was far greater.
And so many of our independent artists operate as their own little small business. I mean, they don't have an umbrella organization to help pay a living wage, to help with benefits. They are on their own. And I know that was devastating for a lot of the folks that I know in our local and area arts community. So I know any help that came their way was most appreciated. Laura, what did you folks notice over in Brooklyn? I can't remember if you had a shuttered venue operators grant or not.
We did not. We had not been open long enough to qualify for a lot of the relief funds. Again, we just opened in June of 2020. So our story is very similar to what Jeff mentioned, just on a lot smaller scale. We did let our staff go. The majority of our staff is part-time, bartenders, custodial, that type of stuff. We just didn't have any hours for them. And so we lost most of our staff during that time. We did have a general manager at that time that moved on as well, just because we didn't have anything going on. and then reached out to the donors that have been so supportive during our campaign to raise money to renovate the Opera House, and really kind of leaned on them to kind of help us get through 2020 and pay the bills when we had no shows coming in, but had already, made deposits on several.
Excellent. So Jeff, how hard was it to get Broadway touring shows and artists back into your venues? Because I know that was really challenging.
Well, it was a little bit of a scheduling nightmare as we just kept kicking the can further and further down the road, and it's an intricate puzzle to begin with, because moving these national tours between cities that are 500-600 miles apart, and has to happen very quickly, and there's just a timing issue. So it was a very, the fact that it all came together was really terrific. The show that we were ready to start when the theaters were shuttered in March of 2020, My Fair Lady, we finally played in August of this year. So it was almost, Tiffany, what was it? It was over 2 years.
Yeah, 2.5 years.
People were showing up with these yellowed tickets from 2020. The fact that they had them was great, but no, and I think for us it was also the challenge was just because the shows that we present here are have a lot of members of unions that travel with the show, and trying to keep up with all of the protocols for those unions, for the actors and the musicians and stagehands. But we got through it. I mean, we are still doing testing. We're still masking backstage. We're doing a lot of things because these shows have to move. You have 80 people that show up for this show, and they have to be well enough to perform and then move on to the next city. So we got through it, and it's still a challenge, but it is getting easier every day.
How has the spirits been among the audiences and even the exhibitors? Is it kind of celebratory that we're back, or cautious that we're back but we don't want to get sick? What are you feeling? What's the temperature of the folks?
I'd say from an exhibition in the visual arts, people are so happy and excited to be back and doing things in person. And while people are still, conservative and a little more reserved perhaps than they used to be, I think that we're now at a point where while not quite as difficult of a puzzle that Jeff and performing arts would have in putting things on a calendar. A perfect example, we are opening an exhibition this Friday night, tomorrow night, from 5 to 7, but with an artist who was the curatorial vision of this work came from Amherst. So it's coming from another institution. It was set to travel. We were scheduled to be the second. It would open typically an exhibition would open where it was created, and that couldn't happen because of the way that things had to move and the way that where works were in other museums and that sort of thing. So it's happening here. It will open here before it goes to Amherst, where it was originated. But as we found, we did our very first public opening in summer of 2021, and we did it timed. We had, 50 people could come for the first hour, 50 people could come for the second hour. We're now back to, for the most part, pre-pandemic level exhibition openings, regularly scheduled programming. And I can't think of a time since we've resumed that where people haven't said, we're so grateful to be back and getting to see work and getting to see each other. And they recognize, I think, that one thing that is consistent for all of us is that during the pandemic, where did we all turn to? We all turned to the artists. We all turned to the authors, to the musicians, to the art that, the creators in the world and the creative community are what kept us sane during a very dark and stressful time. And now being able to step outside of our homes and experience it in the visual arts and the performing arts is truly just an incredible gem that we as presenters of artists have.
What are you seeing, Laura, you have a community theater program that's ready to go up on your stage, or perhaps it's just open? I can't remember. All of my hoopla stories kind of run together, so I forget. But So what's the atmosphere, not only from the cast and crew, but from your audiences? What are you hearing?
People are really excited to get out. They're excited to see their neighbors. They're excited to just be out enjoying themselves in the new theater. You know, during the pandemic, we tried to keep the excitement alive by giving tours, or you could rent the theater and come watch a movie or something like that. But it's so much fun to see the crowds come out, whether it's a wedding, a concert, community theater. We have so many different types of activities here. And we're noticing that our attendance numbers are, while we don't know exactly what they could have been pre-pandemic, our attendance numbers are exceeding expectations right now.
Oh, that's excellent. Jeff, what's the atmosphere like in your various spaces?
You know, it started, I would say when we reopened in September, there was still a lot of trepidation. Our first Broadway show was The Band's Visit, and that was in October of last year. And we saw about between 20 and 25% of our audience just didn't come. They didn't want their money back or anything. They just maybe they didn't feel well. They didn't feel like they wanted to come out. That number has been decreasing over time. Certainly with our three-week run of Hamilton, the attendance was very high for that because it's a very high visibility show. And this past weekend, we did a 5-performance run of the Book of Mormon and had very few no-shows for that. Again, some people are opting to stay home for various reasons. Certainly, if they're not feeling well, we don't want them to be here, and we are very flexible in terms of offering their money back. But yeah, I would say, echoing what Laura said and Tiffany, I think people are just thrilled to be back to experiencing art live and in person. And those people who choose, you know, they're choosing their own journey. Some people are continuing to be masked, some are not. So it's I think it's found a good balance for now, at least in our
Excellent.
place.
David, how about you? What are you hearing?
Yeah, well, just riding the coattails of Tiffany's comment about really what I sense when I'm out is that gratitude. People maybe don't take for granted as much the opportunity to gather, the social aspect of arts and culture, of seeing their friends, their neighbors, their community members. I really feel that when I'm out. I think what we see in terms of numbers too, similar to what my colleagues shared, just to pick a couple examples, you know, people are out, they are attending in person. The community of Oskaloosa just hosted Arts Midwest World Fest. They had 800 people come out for their opening performance. Iowa City just launched a new film festival called Refocus. I know had more than 1,000 people on opening night, packed the house. So I think people are out. I will say what Jeff just shared. I'm not sure where that number is from an Iowa perspective, but definitely just anecdotally, talking to a lot of smaller theater companies as well. They're still seeing some gap. They are not at back to 2019 levels. I know nationally we see some of those numbers too, and I think that's pretty consistent with those trends, but it's going up every month.
That's all exciting. And David, I had a viewer want some clarification. You had given a figure of 50 million, or did you say 50 billion? I think you said million. Oh.
Glad you asked. 50 million was the figure I shared just in the early months of the pandemic for some perspective. And of course, nationally, those numbers are in the billions.
Oh, definitely. It just boggles the mind. What do the arts do for us in times of stress and trial? Because our country's been through many of them. We've had floods, we've had storms, we've had recessions. And of course, none of us have experienced in my lifetime anything like the pandemic, where we all went home and thought, oh, well, in a couple of weeks, we'll be back at the office. And, 2 years later, we're back in the office, which was really emotionally difficult to handle. So shed some light on what role the arts play in getting us through times of trial. Sorry, that wasn't one of the questions I sent you, but it came to mind that, even though we're talking funding, I think that's an important part of keeping connected, which in turn keeps revenue streams open.
Yeah, I think I just probably reiterate, when we look back at this time, I remind my friends and colleagues from outside of the arts world to really explore what it is that you did during that period of time, right? And I think that almost it invariably comes back to the arts, and it does provide it's escapism from the chaos, the crazy. If you can sit through and laugh through the Book of Mormon for 2 hours and walk away and think, okay, during that period of time, I was completely locked in on watching this performance. If you can come to the Des Moines Arts Center and walk through, even if you just walk through a single gallery, and if you're so moved by a piece of work or it causes you to question something that challenges you, maybe you don't like it and you have to think to yourself, why don't I like this? It causes you to really be curious about the world around us, right? I think at its very core, that's what art is it challenges us to be curious about that which we know and are comfortable with, and that which we don't know and are uncomfortable with. And so I think what all of us are providing to the communities in which we live is a space and a platform for them to experience that. And it's vitally important for a better educated and informed society, I think. And I don't mean educated in the sense of an encyclopedic or academic way, but it causes us to think critically. And that's ultimately what the arts do. And so, and why it's so vibrant. I mean, I think that's part of what helps us make the case to our funders, individuals across the board, because it really is, it's the things that challenge us and make us curious.
I remember it just occurred to me that the week of 9/11, which was just horrific on every level, the University of Iowa's Hancher Auditorium presented the Vagina Monologues. And I went to review that. The place was packed and silent. And Wally Chappell, who was the executive director at the time, got up on stage and he said, "We know what the week has been like. It's okay to laugh tonight. It's okay to bring a little bit of, well, it relieved tension, if nothing else." And it didn't take too long before the laughter did start to ripple, but it was an uncomfortable laughter at first, and then we kind of settled in. So for that couple of hours, things felt less chaotic. And so that's kind of my perspective. It helped bring a little calm in the midst of horror.
Yeah, Diana, if I may, that reminds me of a little catchphrase that Americans for the Arts, our nation's advocacy group, was using throughout 2020, and it was "Arts create hope." And as corny or cheesy as that might sound in any other time, it really fit the bill in 2020, and it fits with everything Tiffany said and you just shared about the post 9/11 world. And when we're in moments of crisis, it's oftentimes when the greatest artworks are made too. As we look at art history, that's often a crucible for great art. The other point I just make real quick is that I think virtual engagement is something that our field was so innovative with over the last 2 years as we look at the lessons from the pandemic. I know many organizations have added that to their mix, and it's not going away because their audiences appreciate that in addition to the in-person engagement. So I just think we saw across our field a lot of innovation in that over the last 2.5 years.
I was just speaking with Daniel Kleinknecht from Cedar Rapids Opera about that very thing yesterday, because they're celebrating their 25th anniversary season. And, I asked, because virtual realm became kind of a lifeline for presenters and audiences as well. Jeff, what are some of the programming innovations that you started, and what ones are you continuing?
Well, we did mainly with virtual things. We did those mostly with our education department. Our normal, the things that we do within our education department, one of the big things is a bus-in program for youngsters from pre-K up through high school. Pre-pandemic served about 50,000 students a year, traveling from as many as 40 counties in Iowa to see these performances during school time, sold specifically to the schools. We changed very quickly to a virtual platform for that, offered it for free. Normally, students pay $1, as Tiffany knows, pay $1 for these field trips, but this was offered free statewide, or actually nationwide, if you wanted to tap into it. And we saw a huge number of families take advantage of that. Some of them were They're all curriculum based. Some of them were fun, like a magician, which was a very popular thing. So that was what we did. Our resident orchestra, the Des Moines Symphony, I think did a magnificent job of streaming live concerts from their home in the Temple for Performing Arts downtown, their rehearsal hall, and they did a magnificent job with that. But I do think that what we see, and I'm sure Laura knows this as well, it's really that bringing the community together, that communal experience of sharing a live performance is something that cannot be duplicated. And it's similar in Tiffany's world. She was very eloquent about that. You know, you can look at pieces of artwork online, but it's really not the same as seeing the original. And so to me, that is that bringing those, whether it's 200 or 2,000 strangers together to experience a live performance on stage, there is absolutely nothing like it. And it is something that, as David said earlier, people took for granted at some point now, and are so embracing coming back and being happy to be in that space with all those people.
Laura, do you have any student outreach or any programs where maybe you bring kids in for a matinee or anything like that?
We do quite a few different programs with the students. So actually during 2020, our students here earn silver cord hours for graduation. So it's volunteer hours. And when there wasn't really anything to volunteer at, we would have them down here helping us out and getting their volunteer hours in so that they could still graduate with that silver cord. And that's continued here over the last few years. We also do a lot of kids programming. So we do kids theater camp. We do movie matinees, both over the holiday break and the summer break. And those are all funded by our Chamber of Commerce so that the kids and their families can all come for free. So we try to do a nice balance of activities that are free and open to the community, but then also the ticketed ones. And then this past spring, we did a huge leadership series where we invited anybody. We even had people from Iowa City and Cedar Falls come over for it. But it was once a month for 5 months. And it was just a leadership series about, okay, it's post-pandemic, let's get self right and figure out what's next. So that was really a beneficial series that we put on as well.
How can you folks, and I know that the art museums too have very robust engagements with students and families, how can you use that to help, for lack of a better word, leverage or show to potential funders that you are engaging the next generation, the future of audiences or visitors to your centers?
I think.
Well, please go ahead, Laura. Yeah, please.
I think with things like our theater camp, they put a show on at the end of the week and the community gets to come see it. And they're bringing in grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles and everybody. And it just provides exposure to our venue for some families that may have never been here before. Yeah.
Jeff?
Oh, well, I was going to say, I think, first of all, education is probably the main reason why people give to our organization is the reach that we have with young people coming here. We have the Iowa High School Musical Theater Awards that gives recognition to high school performances across the state. We have over 80 schools participating in that program this year. So the thing that we consistently remind our donors about is that the exposure to the arts at a very young age makes such an impact on students in so many different ways, in test scores, in terms of their ability to really adapt to and to understand the world in a different way. And there is so much research that is in that. And so the value that is given to our society for exposing people at a young age to the arts is something that is very, very, David can talk about this and Tiffany as well for forever. I mean, it's really something that changes lives. So that's probably the core reason that people give to us, is to support those initiatives that we do for young people.
Thank you. Tiffany, how about from the art?
I 100% echo that. I think the primary reason I would say for our individual and frankly, even our corporate support, we have incredible internationally recognized artists coming through our museum on a regular basis. But the piece that I think is the most important and is the message that we really try to emphasize and focus on to our audiences are the difference that the arts make and in young people's lives and in the next future. Because as we've continually seen from a political, the arts are almost invariably the first thing to get cut from schools. And what we see is, especially for those of us that are working with underserved students or students in underserved districts, that truancy, when the arts become involved in a child's life, their attendance increases because it helps kids learn in a new and different way and in a creative way that is vital to how they're going to be successful as they go on to high school and post, graduation. And so I think that those are the things that we are finding through for us as an institution, our community outreach programs. We partner with over 40 different organizations throughout the metro in helping them provide art making and creative thinking opportunities for Boys and Girls Club, for Homes of Oak Ridge, for the Iowa Veterans Department of Veterans Affairs, trying to help people realize that, again, tapping into one's creative self is an empowering opportunity and helps people think differently, think better, and allows them to better speak their truth and whatever that truth may be. And so I think we have to consistently share that message to our audiences that investing in the arts, aside from our ticketed events and aside from the exhibitions that we put on our walls, is the key that really keeps a vibrant community. And so, yeah, I think that is the key message that we are consistently trying to share with help from David and his team is what I was going to say. So
excellent segue. So David, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I can't say it better than my colleagues. And, Des Moines Performing Arts and the Des Moines Arts Center have long been leaders in this area. I think across the state, we see the same thing on a smaller scale where museums, performing arts centers, all sorts of cultural organizations are really essential to their local school district. They work hand in hand with fine arts coordinators to really deliver those experiences. And I think picking up on what Tiffany just shared, there's a lot of focus right now on social emotional learning, wellness, behavioral health, and mental health in the classroom. Tiffany rattled off some great statistics that, we know the arts from deep empirical research. We know the arts have a demonstrable impact on truism, graduation rates, participation rates in classroom, all of these things that support academic achievement. And we know that they're multiplied for at-risk students. So, arts education, like my colleague said, really is not only the rationale for why we do what we do, but I think it's also the area where we can potentially have the greatest impact in the moment we're in now too.
Thank you. And then getting back to, I think we spoke about this earlier, but I want to see if there's something to expand upon. Because as Jeff said, so many of the corporate donors are now not in our communities. The people making those decisions are in another part of the country, and that's true in Cedar Rapids as well. How do you cultivate relationships with these when you can't necessarily take them to dinner or sit down and have a one-on-one in-person conversation? How do you state your case?
I think from a true development standpoint, if there's, we touched on virtual tours and virtual programming. I can say that the virtual space, if there's a silver lining to all of this, it does allow us to have at least some face-to-face, even if it's in this Brady Bunch world in which we now live. It's interesting. I was visiting with a group of development colleagues locally about a month ago, and I said, in 20 years of fundraising, the last 2.5 years, I have received fewer return calls than ever in my life. At least historically, you could reach out to a corporate partner and it may take a week, couple weeks, month or so for somebody to get back to you. Now the calls just don't get returned. And that's a really tough space to be in, but it's because of this. It's because of the fact that people aren't local. It's because we're all working, doing more with less. It's all of those a little bit trite sounding things. But when you can, the relationships, it is core. Development does not exist. Fundraising does not exist if you do not consistently put in the time and consistently make the effort to build those relationships. And if it means having a 6 a.m. phone call because of where someone else is traveling and having a Zoom, that's what you do. And you're still doing the same thing that we've always done. We're still learning about why corporations and organizations, foundations care about us. You just have to keep at it, and you have to rely on some of your board members, people that work for these organizations. I think anytime that you can use those relationships around you locally to boost up those that are more regional and national, you have to do it, and you can't be afraid to ask for that level of assistance.
Jeff, how about you folks?
Well, I think we've shifted a little more of our corporate strategy to maybe smaller corporations and smaller businesses, family-owned businesses that have been around for a long time. Our largest supporter at the corporate level is a sponsorship with Willis Automotive, and that is a significant contribution each year. It is a sponsorship that we value. It's for our Broadway series, and they stepped up 15 years ago with that and have remained in that ever since. And so I think Tiffany is right. You have to rely on your network of individual donors. Many corporations have matching gift programs. Those are essential if you can get them. I know one of the major corporations here in Des Moines, because they were just recently sold, have stopped doing that matching gift. And that is being noticed not only by us, but by the employees themselves who are not happy about that. And so if they can be vocal about it to their corporation, those are great ways that corporations can help to not only support the community organizations, but to support what their employees are interested in giving to. And so those are some of the ways that we are trying to reach out differently.
How about you, Laura, where a lot of your donors perhaps live locally? Are you able to do one-on-one, or how are you fostering relationships now as we come out of the, well, as I say, we hopefully come out of the pandemic time?
Sure. So it is, a lot of it is cultivating those individual relationships that we have here in the community. It is smaller businesses in the community. We don't have the large corporations. And so continuing to work with those groups and making sure they understand the message. And then one other area that we really try to focus on from a long-term perspective is we have an endowment set up with our community foundation, the Greater Poweshiek Community Foundation, and making sure that they know the message too on why we have the endowment and how it's utilized and how it really secures what we have here into the future. And so our focus right now is, I mean, we need day-to-day operations funding, but is to also support that endowment so that 10 years, 20 years from now, they have some money to underwrite some of the costs.
How hard was it to set up a foundation? Because I know that is something that various organizations, especially the smaller ones here in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area, are striving to do. They're seeing the need to have this sort of cushion, perhaps, or knowing that they will have some funding down the road. How did you go about setting it up? Was it a difficult process?
So the Greater Poweshiek Community Foundation is very similar to like the Des Moines Community Foundation. I'm sure there's one over in Cedar Rapids somewhere. They were already established, so they're a separate entity of us. Setting the endowment itself up was actually fairly easy. I believe they don't start granting money out at our community foundation until you have about $10,000 in there. But yeah, it's nice. You can promote the tax credits, the endowment tax credits to people that are looking to make that donation. But setting up the endowment itself, our foundation made it pretty easy.
So what are some of the first steps you would take? Perhaps some of our listeners are wrestling with this or contemplating this road to go.
I would pick whichever community foundation is kind of in your local area that you want to be a part of. If they have questions, I'm sure if they called the Greater Poweshiek Community Foundation, Shannon or Michelle could walk them through exactly the individual steps that you go through to set it up. But really, all community foundations in Iowa are pretty well versed on setting up an endowment.
David, what would you have to offer to this conversation thread?
Yeah, I think, and I know the question you kind of posed to us in advance, Diana, was what can individual Iowans do to really foster more support for arts and culture in our state? I think it starts at an individual level with where you are in your community. Give, volunteer, and advocate. So organizations of all kinds need recurring gifts. They need ongoing revenue streams. So just become a member or donate to your local Arts Council, Historical Society, museum, whatever. That's number one. And then I think number two, as an advocate, certainly reach out to your state and federal elected officials to make your voice heard. It actually really does matter. I think sometimes people wonder if those messages go into the ether. And I think they notice in aggregate what Iowans and Americans are value and what they are talking about. And so really send those messages of support. Here in Iowa, we have the Iowa Cultural Coalition, which is an advocacy organization. They can help with messaging and so forth. And then I think finally, volunteer. All of the organizations featured on this session and across Iowa Ideas, I'm sure, rely upon volunteers to run their programs, particularly a lot of our small organizations. Many are volunteer run and led. They need people to step up and serve on their boards. They need people to step up and help with special events. So I think those are some of the actions you can take to help move our industry forward.
Thank you. I know, Jeff, over the years, I've always been pleased when I've seen some of my Central College classmates ushering at your events. How can people get involved on the various levels with Des Moines arts, performing arts, sorry?
Well, certainly we rely on donations from individuals and families. Is about 60% of the money that we raise in a year. We raise about $3 million in our annual fund. So corporate giving is really only about 20% of that. So individuals, as David said, giving to that level. We are starting to revamp many of our employees here at the Civic Center and the Temple Theater are paid, but we are starting to expand our volunteer opportunities and are going to be launching a new website within the next 6 months that people can come and sign up for opportunities. The other thing I want to touch on is planned giving, because it is something that is a hot topic for a lot of not-for-profits, but it goes back to what Laura was saying, and Tiffany can certainly speak to this as well, that, the endowments that those of us that have them, those are gifts that came decades ago or were planned for decades ago, where a family or an individual said, I want to see this organization exist long after my lifetime. And so those planned gifts are really what can help bolster, and community foundations will tell you exactly the same thing. It is hard to raise money for endowments when there are so many other immediate needs, but the easiest way to get endowment money isn't a planned gift. It is something that will happen, after the donor's death, but it is something that can be a legacy for that family in a great way that can, make sure that these institutions are going to be there for a long time. So that's probably another way to add to what David and Laura said.
Thank you.
I would echo that. I 100% echo that I think that a big part of this is not only does it help us plan for the future, but it also creates more meaningful conversations and more meaningful engagement with the donors that you do have. So you might have an individual or a family that's maybe giving you $50 a year, that you may have somebody who's giving you $500 a year or $25,000 a year. It can be across the board, but it's a very easy thing. And I think people sometimes think of planned giving. If you're not in this world, you think, oh, people don't want to talk about their death. They don't want to talk about that. But at the end of the day, you're talking about the planful nature of taking care of, after you've taken care of your loved ones, you are thinking of how do you want to make a lasting impact in the communities in which you lived and raised your families. And you can do that very easily. Simplest way is through a bequest, putting it in your will that 5% of my remaining estate is going to go to XYZ charity. You can do it with when you if you change your career and you have you're signing up for your 401k, you can designate X percentage. People don't realize how easy it is, and you do not have to have significant wealth to do that. There are obviously certainly far more complex ways of doing it, but it's very easy with an IRA, a 401k, a number of very basic tools. And it may not seem like very much right now when you're doing it at 45, 65, but that does make a difference. Hopefully we live a long and healthy life, and you can make that difference. But the other thing I just also want to touch on, another way that people can help, is I think by lifting up each other's voices, and in this digital space on social media, talking about these things, promoting each other's events, things that you're doing. When, again, just like me being able to say, people who know me know that I cannot make a $500,000 gift. But if they are like, wait, Tiffany Spinner is able to do, she gave something in her estate. Oh my gosh, she did, what is that? But a $2,000 gift may be a big deal to me down the road, but it might encourage others. And so something like that, promoting other people's events, things that we're doing, talking about these things, all boats rise when we're supporting one another and talking about, for me to say, I spoke with somebody and learned about what's happening in Brooklyn today. It was very exciting. Sharing that with my network, either on social media or my in person. Those are the things that we need and are imperative for all of our continued success, is promoting one another.
Well, and I didn't know that aspect of the 401k, so thank you for schooling me on that.
Of course. It's very easy. You can talk to your employer today and you can make that change on your form. It's very easy.
Excellent. Well, we have about 2 minutes left. What thoughts do you have about looking to the future? I had the question of what's your ideal vision for funding? I don't know if we can say that in 2 minutes, but let's give it a shot. How about you, Laura? What's the ideal look like for Brooklyn Opera House?
So ideally here, to make it through each year at either break even or just above that, we are a nonprofit community focused organization. So ideally that would be the goal annually. And then to build some of those endowments and those funds that we just talked about, to where, 20 or 30 years from now, if the Opera House needs a facelift again, that some of the money is already there.
Excellent. How about you, Tiffany?
I think it's continuing to grow the next generation of donors. So it's continually sharing what we're doing and inviting new people to participate and invest in our missions. We know it's not to minimize those that are here supporting us now, but how do we continually engage people in meaningful ways that they'll want to invest in us for years to come?
Jeff, I'm curious, what are some of the thoughts when we look at a traditional opera audience or theater audience, Hampshire audience? A lot of the discretionary dollars come from people who are my age and older. How do you bring in the new folks and the new dollars?
That's something that we are absolutely thinking about right now. And the pricing for some art forms, quite honestly, has gotten a little bit out of control. I will say that we're constantly trying to watch so we can be innovative in our ticket pricing and making access, making it affordable. The challenge with doing things like opera or Broadway shows or symphony orchestras is it is very labor intensive, and you can't cut corners on that. So finding ways to, as Tiffany mentioned earlier, it has been baked into the mindset of the Des Moines Art Center for decades that they want it to be free. And so they don't even look at earned revenue as being a source. It's really about the donations. And so once you can get your head around that, then it really makes it easy to be able to say, yeah, we can be very innovative in how we price those things. But yeah, it is about getting access, and as Tiffany said, trying to build those audiences to become donors and advocates moving forward.
David, any final thoughts as we wrap up our session?
Yeah, I think for us, Diana, as an arts funder, hope for the future maybe could be summed up by the word equity, which I think is something that is a theme throughout today's Iowa Ideas Conference, and certainly a huge topic in our field. And what that means to me is that people can find the right resource at the right moment when they need it. As we talked about today, over the last 2.5 years during the pandemic, that looked like one thing, the types of resources that people need. But moving forward, that might be, as Laura was speaking to, needing resources, really to work on preservation or education or access. For Jeff and Tiffany, that might be funding for special initiatives or something that they want to do that goes beyond the normal base of programming. So, and I think for a lot of our smaller organizations, our communities of color, a lot of our rural communities, they have historically, been underfunded, and so trying to increase the amount of funding for some of those organizations, that is basically what I think our task and our hope is for the future.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. Our panelists have been fantastic and offered great advice for those of you who are listening, who are involved in your own communities and in arts organizations, or just love the arts in general. Get out and see a show, go walk through an exhibit and just sit and breathe in the art that's on the walls, the art that's on the stage. Whether you are a creator, we're all in this, and we are, our kids, our grandkids, they're the future. So thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.